Welcome to our NICU Parenting in a Pandemic group. Before we begin, we're going to go over the Zoom etiquette again. We're going to offer a time for questions, but go ahead and utilize the chat. Remember that our session is being recorded. So if you can mute yourself and close your video. If you want to use the hand signal to raise your hand, that'd be great. To access the slides and handouts, tap the document tab in the app on the website and select session documents. You can find the session and the note pages in your book on page 26. And now I'm going to start introducing our panel. It is my pleasure to introduce you to our moderator, Holly Lozano. She's a developmental specialist at Banner Thunderbird Medical Center and has been a nurse for 26 years, with a majority of them spent as a NICU nurse. And then I'm going to give you a little bit of background on the panelists. And Holly, if I've missed anybody, I'm going to apologize in advance. All of our panelists for this session are parents who have had children in the NICU. And I was sharing with our great panel that I too was a NICU parent, and I guess once, always. Krista is a first-time mom to a preemie, Kaylee. She's been married for 7 years and lives in Chandler. She's a licensed clinical social worker specializing in trauma-focused therapy and is in the process of pursuing her perinatal mental health certification through Postpartum Support International. Lindsay is Mackenzie's mom, who was born at 24 weeks, weighing only 15 ounces. Mackenzie was in the hospital for 310 days before coming home. She's now 3.5 and thriving. Through their experience in the NICU, they were inspired to start the Kenzie Cares Foundation, a nonprofit that helps support other families currently going through the NICU. Sarah is an Arizona native and the mother of 5. Sarah is a movie buff, board game aficionado, and an ASU grad and football fan. Sarah's 4th baby was born at 24 weeks and spent 205 days in the NICU. Inspired by their experience, Sarah and her husband have used their small business to support other NICU families through their Bows, Books, and Beanies program. We are so lucky to have all of you here. And now I'm going to ask you, Holly, to go ahead and take over the moderation.
Okay, so yes, as Eileen said, we have an amazing panel of moms here, brave moms willing to share their stories. So thank you for being with us and listening. And put questions in the chat or comments. And Megan's going to be monitoring that so we can get to those towards the end. So I wanted to give each mom a little chance to introduce themselves briefly and just a little bit. We heard kind of a length of stay, but just a little bit about themselves and their families, more than what they were introduced. So we'll start with Sarah, if you want to go first and give us a little bit of a background about your NICU story.
Yes, so my NICU story, Bo was born back in 2018. He was I had a placental abruption, which is what caused him to come early, prematurely. At the time, I had 3 older kids, and it was obviously not planned that he was going to come that early. I actually didn't know that I was going to have him until probably 3 days before that there was a really good chance he was going to come when he did. And then he came and it was all kind of a blur still. Like, I remember being in the hospital saying like, hey, you're probably going to have this baby within a day or two, you know, we'll try to keep him in there, but this is what it's looking like. And I was just like, no, there's no way. Like, I was kind of listening to what they were telling me, but kind of was just like, we'll be fine. We'll be able to keep him in there. But he had different plans, decided that was when he wanted to come. So we did it. He came and he fought hard, and we did it all while having the 3 other kids at home, which was crazy, but very doable with amazing support from family and friends. And he's thriving, doing really well here. He's now 3.5, and we actually have another little girl who was born a year ago. Yeah, in April. So almost, she just turned 1. So yeah, he's doing really good, and I'm happy to be here.
Awesome. Thank you for sharing, Sarah. All right, Krista, do you want to go next and give us a little background on your NICU story?
Sure. So our story actually started years before we had our daughter. We struggled with infertility, and she was the result of our 5th round of fertility treatment, which we happened to do right at the very beginning of COVID, not knowing what was coming. So we ended up doing everything completely alone in lockdown. So very different than we ever experienced, but pregnancy was really normal up until one day I was told my blood pressure was high. I was scheduled for a follow-up a few days later. Everything changed. Next thing I know, I'm in the hospital. And then one day later, I'm giving birth at 33 weeks. I gave birth to her on Christmas Eve, 2020, due to complications from gestational hypertension. Really shocking, because literally hours before we thought I was going to be going home, it was literally 3 hours from when something was wrong to she was out. It wasn't a very long NICU stay. I was in the hospital for 7 days and she was there for 24.
Sorry, but as Eileen said in the beginning, 1 day is too many days in the NICU. So yes, thank you, Krista. All right, Lindsay, would you like to give us a little synopsis of your NICU story?
Hi, everybody. I'm Lindsay. We actually have a very similar story to Sarah. My daughter Mackenzie was born back in 2018, November 2018, and she came at 24 weeks. Really no rhyme or reason. Everything was great up until then through my pregnancy. And we just got an ultrasound that they did not like. And the doctor actually wasn't at the ultrasound office at the time. And anyone who's ever had a child knows that the ultrasound techs can't tell you anything. So our ultrasound tech basically just said, I can't tell you what's going on, but we don't feel comfortable with you leaving here without going straight to a hospital with a great NICU. So we went and checked in that night. Mackenzie was born 3 days later. Still to this day, don't exactly know why she came early. But she was born at 24 weeks. We had IUGR, so that is where it's intrauterine growth restriction. So Mackenzie was actually measuring the size of a 21 to 22 weeker. She was born 15 ounces, less than a pound. She was only 8 inches, teeny tiny. She spent 310 days in the NICU between Banner Thunderbird and then over at Phoenix Children's Hospital. Came home with a trach, ventilator, oxygen dependent, feeding tube dependent, pretty immobile. And now she's running, playing. She just started gymnastics. She's off the ventilator, got her breathing tube removed. So growing, doing awesome. It's been a crazy journey, but she's doing great now. So yeah.
Awesome. Thanks for sharing.
Yeah.
So next question we would like to know about is, what is one thing about your postpartum experience while your baby was in the NICU? So knowing that each of you had your kind of a part of your 4th trimester or your whole 4th trimester while your baby was in the NICU. What was one thing that you didn't know or expect, or an emotion that you didn't know or expect? But knowing a NICU stay is never an expectation. So Lindsay, do you want to tackle that one?
Yeah, sure. I'll jump in on that one. So it's funny because I never knew anything about the NICU before we had Mackenzie. I mean, it was just not really like something we knew anything about. It was a part of the hospital that you don't really go to unless you have to. You're not really walking by, like looking at the NICU, you know. So it's funny because, you know, you wander down a hallway, you get to the NICU, and then it's just filled with all these people who are just amazing and have to understand these babies in ways that no one else in the medical profession has to, because anyone who deals with, you know, older kids or adults, they can tell you what's wrong. They can tell you where it hurts. They can tell you what they're feeling. Babies cannot. They can't communicate with you. So it's a whole different experience in the NICU, working with, all these people who are in there from, the RTs, the nurses, the doctors, the specialists, anyone that's working within a NICU, they have to understand these babies on such a different level. And because of that, I think they gain such a different bond with not only the babies, but the families. And we left the NICU with lifelong friends. I mean, our daughter's neonatologist became her godmother. I mean, we left that NICU with, family, really. So that was something that kind of struck me going through that experience.
Awesome. Krista or Sarah, either one of you want to jump on that?
I can.
Okay.
Ours was, so my, like the thing I didn't expect the most is a little bit different was really how lonely it was. Because like I said, she was born right in the middle of lockdown and they had very, very, very strict rules, which I'm very grateful for. Of course, that kept her safe. It kept everyone safe. But that also meant we couldn't meet any of the other parents there. The only people we had contact with was a nurse behind a mask. It also meant that my husband and I could not be there together. It was one visitor once a day, very limited hours. So I was really shocked just how incredibly lonely the whole process was. We had no information together. So really outside of the OR for like those few minutes, like moments before they whisk them away, the first time my husband and I met her together was in the parking lot when we were taking her home, which was just not what we expected. Because even if the NICU, we expected like we'd have her together, we did not. So the emotion I didn't expect was loneliness.
Oh, Krista, wow. That's tough. That is tough. Is there anything else that you wanted to add?
Yes. First of all, that I can't even imagine that like that. I mean, we had Sobo also, like Mackenzie, had a trach. He actually had his trach put in 3 years ago yesterday. So he doesn't have it anymore, but that was his trach anniversary was yesterday. So he actually got decannulated in July 2020. So that was pandemic time. So we had to do that where like I was the only one who took him to the hospital to get his trach out, which was just this huge thing that we were working hard to get to and everything. And I remember doing that alone and feeling like that was a good, like that was something good that was happening, but it was still to do that alone and not to have my husband there, like sitting in the waiting room while he's back in the operating room. So I cannot even imagine. I think all the time about the parents who have had children, like, we've dealt with it and we've had like appointments and stuff that we do all the time by ourselves, but like giving birth my heart. I just feel for you with that and think you're amazing for being able to do that. Another, I guess like an emotion that I didn't expect with having my other 3 kids at home was just feeling that sense of wanting to be at home with them and feeling like I needed to be a mom to them. And then also being at the hospital with Bo. That was probably not something I was expecting. Looking back, I'm like, I don't really even know how we did it. I know, but like some days it just was really hard because I couldn't be both places at the same time. And the thought of having my baby there at the hospital without me was absolutely horrible. But then I had my other kids that had kindergarten programs and games and dance and all these other things that I wanted to not miss out on either. So I would say that that's probably an emotion that I wasn't kind of just hit me really hard and was just something that I had to kind of slowly figure out, it's okay, everything will be okay. And that I have the people that in my life that I could rely on to be there in the places that I couldn't be and when I needed to be somewhere else. So.
And I think hearing from all 3 of you, those are all 3 common, responses. Some people feel more connected. Some people feel more isolated. Some people with older kids or other kids feel that tear. Where do I need to be? Where should I be? And then throw the pandemic on top of that, and that it makes for very difficult circumstances. So what was one thing that you guys found helpful in your support? Something somebody said or did that you guys really found helpful? Sarah, you want to go?
Sure. One thing, there's so many things, but I think one thing that sticks out to me is something that my dad actually told me when Bo was in the hospital, because there'd be so many days where he would have a setback and be like, I just don't know. Like, I tried to have like a very positive attitude about everything that was happening, because we knew he was going to be in there for at least, I mean, coming at 24 weeks, there was no, he was at least going to be in there for a while, like no matter what the outcome was, trach, no trach, or whatever. And I remember my dad telling me, Sarah, you can do anything for a little bit. Like, just take this as it is now, and you can do this, rather than like looking at it as a whole, like, okay, are we going to be in here for 6 months, 7 months, 8 months? Just looking at it like you can do anything you need to do for a short amount of time. And I actually have a sister who is getting ready to have a baby, who is going to be, we already know she's going to have a NICU stay. She's diagnosed with CDH. And that's what I tell her. I'm like, you can do this. Even though she hasn't had the baby yet, she's not due till middle of May. I'm like, she knows what's going to come, kind of a little bit in a way. She knows she's going to have a NICU stay. I'm like, you can do this. Like, we can take it one day at a time, and just anything, you can handle anything for that short amount of time, so that's just something that's kind of always stuck with me.
Yeah, those are wise words. So true. How about Krista? Do you want to share something that you found helpful or supportive?
Sure. I actually asked my husband this question too, because I was curious, like what his thought, like what was most helpful or supportive from others. And he had kind of the same initial reaction I did, which was there wasn't a whole lot, because it didn't seem like it was much of a reality to most people in our lives, because nobody saw me pregnant, not a single person, except for him and my doctor, basically. But I did have, so most people, when they found out, it was kind of like, call me if you need something, which great, but I didn't even know what I needed. I'm sure everyone here can say the same thing. We don't really know what we need in that moment, and it's hard to think about. But I had one friend who offered very real and specific support, where she would tell me, I'm coming on this day at this time. Do you want Starbucks or do you want to walk? Do you want me to watch the baby? Like, what do you like? She would give me very specific options, basically. So I didn't have to think about it. She would also check in on me daily on how I was doing, not just the baby, because of course everyone's checking on the baby. Everyone wants to know how the baby's doing, but we kind of get lost in the mix. Most people don't check in on how we're doing in that situation. So I think really the most supportive, the most helpful thing was somebody giving me specific things that were helpful and checking in on me to make me feel important too.
Oh, that's awesome. Just out of curiosity, had she had kids of her own?
She had not. Oddly enough, she's also another therapist too, so kind of made a little more sense there.
Yeah, that's great. Oh, that's awesome. What about you, Lindsay? You want to jump on with anything?
Yeah, I love all of these answers. I'm going to throw that out there. These are awesome answers. I think for me, our experience was very different from yours, Krista, because like Sarah said, I couldn't imagine going through what we did in the pandemic. It's a totally different beast going through a NICU experience. But for me, I think what was really helpful was just interacting with other families, because at the time we could do that back in 2018, 2019, pre-pandemic, and just meeting other families going through similar situations like us. It kind of gave us a little bit of reality, because like you were saying, it's, people don't really understand the NICU life and the reality of a NICU unless you've been there. So just connecting with other families, whether it's, we met Sarah because she was in the room next to us with her son, Bo. So that's how we met Sarah. So just connecting with those other families who really understood and we could kind of bond with and realize that we're not the only ones going through this, which I think, helped alleviate us from the loneliness that is a very much a real thing when you're going through the NICU. So for us, it was just interacting with other families, getting advice from parents who had come before us through the NICU, connecting with other families that had already left the NICU and just kind of how their experience was. And then there was actually someone I think it was at Banner Thunderbird NICU that connected us with a parent support group that's specifically for NICU parents. It's through Hand to Hold. And we just hopped on a call once a week, and it's literally just a call. I would sit in Mackenzie's room and just hop on this call, and it's basically just a bunch of parents who are going through the NICU and just like commiserating with each other kind of in a way, but also supporting each other in what they're experiencing and helping each other just find the strength that you need to get through those experiences. So that was a big thing for us, was that call as well. Just realizing that there are other people out there going through this.
Mm-hmm. Oh, that's awesome.
I know, and if I can jump into Lindsay, I have to give Lindsay a shout out. She really did. That was ginormous. Being able to like talk to the other families that are in there is huge, because Lindsay was kind enough to let us come in and see Mackenzie before Bo, because she had already had her trach. And so we walk in and it's just, the trach is overwhelming. It's all, and they just were like doing things for her and moving her around, and actually like, it was so, I'll never forget going in there and being able to like see that, spend that little time with you guys, and just like, you were always, and any questions we had or whatever, you're probably like, okay, leave us alone. We had so many questions, but we were pod mates for a while and they helped us so much. So
yeah, I know. We were always like, be our friend. We have the same kids.
No.
And that's awesome. I'm so glad to hear that, because it's been tough as a nurse to see the lack of connection because of COVID, like I'm sure Krista felt. So I'm happy that we're able to offer some more connection now. We're getting back to that. So that's exciting to hear. I might veer, we just have a couple minutes left. And somebody did ask in the chat, were there services you wish you had while in the NICU? It sounds like maybe a connection with other parents would be one. And I know we didn't talk about this beforehand, but do you guys have anything that you wish would have been offered, a service?
I'll hop in if that's okay. I would definitely say some kind of like parent liaison, or like someone to help connect parents with the right resources that they're needing, whether that's, support with, maybe they have other kids at home and they can't find daycare or whatever, so that they can come to the hospital. Maybe there's a parent liaison that can connect them with some kind of service that offers that, or if they can't afford gas to get to the hospital, maybe there's a service from a nonprofit like Kenzie Cares Foundation that can provide that kind of support to help get them the gas money they need, or bus tickets, things like that, to get to the hospital to visit their kid. So I would say some kind of like parent liaison that really is, like Krista was saying, there for the parent, because I don't think there really is that like person that really helps the parents the way they need with, if you come home with a child with medical needs, finding the right like ongoing medical like training with how to deal with those kinds of things, because oftentimes they're just kind of thrown to the wind. I remember getting home with a very medically fragile child and feeling like completely overwhelmed, no idea how to find help, or like how to find, ways to understand how the ventilator works if it's going off and we don't know why, or, so I would definitely say some kind of parent liaison to help connect with those kinds of services.
Good. Awesome. I cannot believe how fast this time has flown by. I could ask 1,000 more questions and we could do this all day. But I know our time is winding down. Megan, is there anything else that you saw pop up that I missed from the chat?
I'm actually thinking I set my alarm for 3:46 because I thought we had until 3:50. Am I totally? Yeah, we have time, ladies. We have another 20 minutes of free flow.
Okay, my computer's off. Okay, we're gonna keep chatting then. Thank you.
Of course. Yeah.
In which case, I'll add on to something that Lindsay said, because it triggered something in my mind, which along the same lines, just the resources for parents. But I wish there was some way that knowing like along the lines of like, we were we all of a sudden, yes, we came home with like a very medically fragile child with all these machines and this and that. But I had no idea how like insurance, like, and like getting help through what services were like that they were saying like, you can get this, you can get this. But I didn't know what any of that was or what any of that meant. So I think it'd be really cool to try to find, or I don't know, really helpful for parents to just like, you get thrust into this world where they're like, they know all this lingo and you're like, okay, like, you know, DDD and all this. And like, yes, I've heard of that stuff before, but I never have needed it, or I never knew what it actually was. And so now I'm like, I'm still learning and there's still things that I'm like, oh, I really wish I would have known this back 2 years ago versus what I'm learning now. Cause I'm like, oh man, the things I could have done with him 2 years ago versus the things that the services and cares that I'm getting him now. So I think that would be one thing that would be really helpful too, kind of along the same lines of just extra parent support, like a class that you can go to that like these things might be, you might be eligible to get your child in these services and they could help for these reasons. So
anybody that's had to do anything with insurance can identify that.
Oh, don't get me started on it right now. I'm just kidding.
Yeah. Awesome. Okay. So we did talk about things that other people said or did that were helpful for you guys. What was one thing that you felt you could do for yourself while your baby was in the NICU? Like a self-care tip or something to kind of help yourself get through that. So I don't know, Krista, you want to start with that one?
Oh, sure. So self-care we did in the NICU. To be honest, I did not do much of that. Of course, I'm sure we've all heard the things like, oh, it must have been so nice to go get to rest while the baby was being taken care of by someone else, which like, maybe that's a reality for some, but it was not mine. It felt so chaotic between going to the hospital and shopping and setting up the nursery and everything else and trying to figure out life. There was not time. And so it felt like I really fell to the wayside and I was not doing much self-care at all. I also had a little bit of a complicated recovery. And at some point, one of the nurses sat me down and had a conversation that, yes, she has seen moms readmitted and to start taking care of myself. So I had to give myself permission to slow down. And I think that's the biggest self-care thing I did, was just giving myself that permission to slow everything down. And yeah, I may feel guilty for a moment for not being there every single minute I could possibly with the limited hours, but just acknowledging I can be there when I can get there. I had to put myself first. She was safe, she was cared for. So really the necessities, taking a shower every day, making sure I ate before I went, just the really basic things, because none of that was happening before.
Yes, that is tough. That's the first to go, I think. Self-care is the first to go. So thanks for sharing that. Lindsay, what about you?
Sure. I would say similarly to Krista, self-care out the window for 310 days there. But my answer would probably be very similar to yours, Krista, just allowing yourself the time, like when you're in the NICU, the world stops. I mean, it just kind of stops for you and it keeps going for everyone else. But for us, it was on pause because our entire lives were centered around Mackenzie and what was going on that day. So just kind of allowing that to be okay, I think, and realizing for us that, if we don't get to it, it's okay. If we don't respond to these 3 people who are checking in on us because our daughter is very critical today, it's okay. And just kind of relieving ourselves from some of that guilt of what's kind of just normal life for most people, like getting back to phone calls, getting back to voicemails, getting back to, emails, whatever it is. Just kind of like allowing it to be okay to just kind of step away from the world that keeps moving and kind of deal with what's in front of you and what's going on in the NICU. So I think for us, just kind of shutting off that guilt a little bit. Because all the other things, showers every day, I wish I would have got there. So
that was also pushed by my husband to make sure I did that. So I guess I'd had to take the hint.
I'm sure he said it in love. Yes. Okay. What about you, Sarah?
Yes, a shower can change the world. I just remember some days I'd be like, I just would be feeling so off and I just like need to go take a shower and I'd feel so much better after that. But also true, there'd be days where you'd go in the morning and you wouldn't leave until 5, 6, 7 at night and the sun would already be down. You're like, I didn't even see the sun today. Like it is very weird. Time stops when you're in there and you look out the window and you're like, it's crazy that there's still like things going on out there. But a couple things that we tried to do, or that I tried to do, making like the pod as like, as comforting as you can. I am a big movie person. I love listening to podcasts. I love listening to books, movies, whatever. I took that stuff in. I was like I'd be watching movies while I was holding Bo. That helped. Getting up and moving around, even if so you don't want to leave, just go for a quick walk. Another thing we did that might be helpful if we scheduled for our other kids, we had a babysitter come in once a week, and we knew then that like we would have our date night, and we actually went to see Bo together, which I know may not be the case right now with pandemic stuff, but and whatever, like the restrictions on the hospitals right now. But that like was huge for us because we were never with the other kids at home, we were never there together. So because if I was there, he was home and vice versa. So scheduling that babysitter and then having the babysitter here with the other kids, and we'd go get dinner and then go see Bo, that also was like huge too, because we knew we had like that time. So it's hard. It never feels natural to not be there with your baby, but also leaning on the people that are around you. Like my sisters would be like, okay, let's go get dinner. Like we have to, like they would pull me and I would fight it, but then I was there, I'd go and I'd be like, okay, I needed this. And then I'd hurry back to the NICU. But even just those small breaks, just give yourself those breaks and give yourself so much grace for like feeling all those crazy feelings of wanting to be somewhere, but also needing to take time for yourself and to take time for yourself. So
definitely some commonalities in the three of yours answers, which is interesting. Yeah, very good though. And again, this question is asked with knowing that a NICU stay is never expected. But once you kind of knew that maybe this was going to be a possibility or it was coming, is there anything that could have helped prepare you for what you were kind of gonna go into? Sarah, do you want to start with that one?
I guess this kind of has been on my mind a lot lately because of my sister, because she knows beforehand, she knows she's going to be in the NICU with her baby girl. And so I've kind of been trying to help her in any way that I can. Like, what would I have wished I would have known beforehand, if I'm saying that right? I would say, don't be afraid to ask questions. There's no crazy questions. And we were lucky enough to have doctors and nurses that would allow us, they would say that like, okay, any more questions? But really, don't be afraid. You can ask anything, even if it feels like the simplest question that you should know the answer to. And also don't be afraid to ask why, because sometimes they would say, oh, we're going to put him on this. And we'd be like, oh, why? And then the doctor would be like, oh, well, for this, but also maybe we could try this, or I don't know. Just don't be afraid to ask questions. And then, I lost my train of thought, but I mean, that's one thing that I think. And then just again, with knowing that like, I can do anything for this amount of time, like, sometimes it's hard when people would tell me like, oh, this will be a distant memory one day, because at the time it didn't seem that way. And I almost didn't want it to be, because I never want to forget what we had to go through to get where we are today. But just taking it a day at a time, and just not overwhelming yourself with the what ifs and the future of the unknown. So I'd say that.
Okay, good. Lindsay, you want to jump on that? Do you have any thoughts about that?
Yeah, as far as being prepared, I think one thing that we kind of struggle with at the beginning that I think would be really helpful would be just kind of maybe some kind of guide to the language. Because when you get into the NICU, I mean, everyone speaks the same language, but it's a very different language than you're used to if you've never spent time in the NICU. There's a lot of words being thrown around that are very normal in the NICU, but to kind of the outside world, it doesn't make sense. So maybe some kind of like guide or like understanding of what different things mean that are common things that are, you know, thrown out, like kangaroo care. Like that's a common thing, which is skin to skin holding your child, which we would have never known what a kangaroo care was. So little things like that, that we would kind of have to, you know, waste everyone's time, be like, what are you talking about? So some kind of resource like that would be really helpful. And one thing that we found really helpful prior to Mackenzie being born, I mean, we were in the hospital for 3 days before she was born. So it was a very short time, but we were able to meet with a neonatologist from the NICU who kind of walked us through what's kind of going on, what admission would look like, you know, what to expect kind of in those first 24 to 48 hours if this were to come to fruition. Obviously it did for us. So just having that kind of preparedness from the staff prior to was really helpful for us to even understand what was going on or what an admission would look like or what to expect being admitted into the NICU.
Good, good. How about you, Krista? You have anything you would like to add?
Sure. Yeah, definitely. Of course, everything that they've said, of course, very, very helpful. All things that would be really helpful to help prepare for the NICU stay. One thing I wish I would have, I think would help, you know, if it happens again in the future or for, you know, other parents is having the logistical support kind of set up in advance if you know something's coming. Even if, you know, beginning of your pregnancy, having some things planned, like who can bring you food? Is somebody going to set up a meal plan? Because we didn't have any of that. We came home and we're like, oh, now we have no food. Like, what do we do? We didn't have anything prepared or ready to go. Who can drive you to the hospital if you can't drive? Because I couldn't drive for several weeks. Who's going to clean the bottles? Who's going to be there to support you? Do you have someone you can set up to actually check in on you each day? Is having a lot of that planned out. A lot of those things do tend to come to fruition, you know, during the postpartum phase at some point. But I think like we're, you know, thinking of our next pregnancy, is that something we want to have set up well in advance? So if something does happen, we have the support in place.
Yeah. And the planner side of me says, yeah, that's natural. But when you're in that chaos, that does not get to come through. So absolutely.
Yeah, it was on the list to do. It just hadn't, you know, it was supposed to come after the baby shower and after the maternity photos, which of course never happened.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, yes. So true. So true. I see Ramya put a quote, or excuse me, a question, in the chat, and I wanted to read it to you guys and get some feedback for it. So she said, as a NICU professional, one of my big triggers is when I hear jargon that is not parent friendly, like something as seemingly simple as we don't do big people, which could feel like we only support the baby. What are some things you wish you didn't hear or you wish were phrased differently? Krista, was there anything that comes to mind for you that you kind of cringed when you heard it?
I did cringe because when you asked, is there something you wish had been phrased differently? Because there was one statement made by a neonatologist who luckily I did not have to have any more interactions with that literally made me break down crying as soon as he said it. And he just left the room. I was still in the hospital. Like I said, I was in the hospital for 7 days due to complications. They could not get my blood pressure stable. I was not doing well. And the NICU nurse and my husband had both convinced me to like take a break from the NICU, go rest, take care of myself. So he came in, the neonatologist came in to talk to us in my room, and I happened to be pumping. And as he was about to leave, he made some comment like, I don't remember the exact words, but it was something like, maybe you should go pump in front of your daughter instead of the front of the TV. And I'm like, I had just had multiple, I'm going to cry now because it made me so mad. I had had multiple people convince me to take a step away. And then it was just like, here's more guilt. So yeah, consider what the mom's going through as well.
Oh, Krista, I'm so sorry that you had to hear that. That is tough. That is tough. I'm sorry. Lindsay or Sarah, anything that you guys thought of as we're talking about this?
Yeah, I'll hop in. We were there a very long time, 310 days, almost a year. One thing that we were repeatedly asked, and it was really it wasn't from anyone specifically, it was just kind of everyone. It's a very normal question in real life, but was when we were coming back. So we were heading out, maybe we were going home for a couple hours to shower and get a nap in because we hadn't slept in 24 hours. Saying something like, okay, well, when can we see you again? When can we expect you again? When are you going to be back? When are you going to be here? Just kind of that question of making me feel like maybe I shouldn't leave. I haven't gone home in 24 hours to even like take a shower, but maybe I shouldn't leave. It kind of just initiates that feeling of like, you're in the wrong for leaving, kind of a thing. You're leaving your baby, kind of a thing. And for anyone who knows our story, we barely left the hospital, like at all, ever. So I would say that one triggered us a lot, just kind of that constant asking when you'll be back, when you're going to be here, when can we, tell the next nurse at shift change you'll be back, or whatever it is. So that one was a trigger for us.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Thanks for sharing that, Lindsay. How about you, Sarah?
Yeah, one thing that probably comes to my mind is when they would compare him to other babies, and also kind of just like more of a baby there and not my baby. Like there was one time that I was like holding him and my back was faced towards, and they were doing rounds where they come around to each in the morning or whatever it is, and they come with the team and they talk about what's happening with the baby. And I was sitting there holding Bo, and the doctor was behind me, and it was like I wasn't even there. He just started talking and just kind of started going off on all these things. And it was a doctor we hadn't really seen a bunch, and he was totally just talking about Bo like he was just some other, like, okay, this, and just like throwing all this stuff in there. And I just remember being like, wait, I'm right here. Like, come. I was holding him, and he was like on a ventilator, so I couldn't just like move to turn to him. If he could have just come and like put his face in front of mine and actually talk to me. I think just like that, just remembering that like it's your baby. I know they see a bunch. I know they work so hard, and I'll never be able to repay all the doctors and nurses that took care of Bo. They were the best. But it's just remembering that, like, that to the parent, it's like their world, Yeah. And just each baby is so individual, and to kind of treat them that way, just to know, they're just different.
Yeah. Thank you for sharing that, Sarah. That's so valuable. It really is. So good.
Could I add on to that possibly?
Yes, of course.
Just when she mentions that, it makes me think of my favorite neonatologist, who whenever I was there and they would come talk to me, they would ask if it was a good time to talk to me first, making sure I was in the headspace. They would then position their chair always right in front of me. They'd be on my level. They would ask questions and not use jargon. And I think I saw that somebody who's a professional as well, is that was so important, because it made me feel like I had power back, and you were actually talking on my level where I could understand it, versus just, saying things at me when I'm not in a space to take any information. Mm-hmm. So yeah, absolutely, Sarah, I agree. When they were kind of behind you or just spouting information, it was so difficult. But when they're right in front of you at your level, it's so much better.
Yeah. Thanks, you guys, for sharing that. So meaningful to hear that from you guys, your perspectives. We have a couple more questions, it looks like, that are coming up. So we often dump a bunch of papers, welcome books, admission to the NICU, etc., when everything is a blur, and assume you're going to read it in your free time, right? How can we better cater to learning retention needs of the family, and how can we time our delivery of the information to be helpful and meaningful when you're in that good headspace? Krista, do you want to tackle that one, talking about that good headspace?
I think it was, again, just explaining the information, because I did eventually read all of those things, and luckily it was all things they had discussed at different points. But yeah, I think having someone actually explain everything, again, on your level, and asking if it's a good time. Ideally would have been having that conversation with both my husband and I present, so we could hopefully both retain information, because the number of times I was told something or he was told something and then it gets lost in translation, and then we're calling and trying to find the doctor to actually talk to was difficult. So having that conversation with both parties present would be very helpful. Of course, wasn't an option, but offering to call something would have been nice.
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. And I know, Lindsay, you had kind of talked about a parent liaison. I could see how that could cover some of the education and the timing of it, but anything specific that you want to add to that?
I'm so glad you mentioned that, Holly. Yes, I'm a big advocate for parent liaisons. Just as that connector between the medical professionals and the staff of the NICU and what a new parent in the NICU is going through. I think that connection often gets lost. So, I didn't read all that paperwork. I'm not as good of a student as Chris is. Our admission was extremely hectic. So, getting all that paperwork dumped on you, it's not always a priority when, your child is in critical condition. If they're being admitted to the NICU, something's wrong. So that's more of a priority typically. So maybe even just considering giving kind of what's necessary at that time, what's necessary at admission, and maybe some of the other kind of longer term stuff or just kind of information that's going to apply at some point can be held off on until a more appropriate time. And like Krista said, just making sure it's a good time and not just kind of throwing the paperwork in your lap and saying, here you go, good luck, and then walking away when a parent might not be ready to kind of retain anything going on with paperwork versus what's happening with the child. So parent liaisons, yes.
Awesome. I think for reals, we have a few minutes left. Is that right, Megan?
Yep, you're right now. Yep, correct. Yeah.
And there's some other great questions. So yeah, go ahead and wrap things up and then maybe we can talk after.
There's one about from Daniela, and she said, did any of you have to go back to work while your baby was in the NICU, and how did you manage that?
I could jump right in. We own a small business, so our work never stopped. Yes, it was nice because we could we decide what we do when, but at the same time, it kept going, and could say that it was like one of our busiest times because he was born in October, and that is definitely our busiest time of year, is the end of the year. So how did I manage that? Taking that support that anybody offers you, instead of saying, I'm fine, say, no, that'd be great if you could come take my kids to the park for a couple hours, like that would be huge. And then just saying no to things, I think too, like it's okay if you can't do everything that we wanted, that we would have normally done, but just saying like, it's okay to say no, like I just can't take that right now. My plate is too full. That's a hard one for me because I'm like a yes. But just taking that step back, I don't know what, okay. The computer's talking. But yeah, I guess just accepting the help and just trying to give yourself lots and lots of grace. You may not be able to do everything that you were doing before, and that's totally okay. And that is okay to feel that way. It's don't be too hard on yourself, and just kind of take that step back and just slowly start to get back into things, whatever that looks like, whatever the new normal looks like, and just do the best you can.
And I would encourage anyone who is working to talk to their human resources department. If you haven't been at the agency for a year, you may not qualify for paid disability insurance or FMLA, but still talk to your human resources and talk to them again and talk to them again and talk to them again. Okay. Oops, this was amazing. And my heart was racing thinking about what you all have accomplished. And like I said, my daughter is older now, so I want you to remember that they grow up to be amazing, resilient individuals because of that start. Their world started differently than others. And so they're going to be fighters. And so when they're arguing with you at 3, just remember, no one's ever going to take advantage of them. I had to remind myself of that often and still do. So I want to thank you so much. Continue the conversation in the chat. I know that we have another session. There's our final sessions. So in room 1 is newborn sleep. In room 2 is finding purpose, passion, and progress. And in room 3, it's sound healing. So thank you all and see you in the next session.